So we're going to have cameos of 3 minutes of several chaplains from different contexts, and then they will be the people that you meet in the workshops afterwards, and come and learn something, come and listen to chaplains and see how we might be able to engage with the well-being of chaplains to help them and encourage them to fulfill their ministry to which they feel called through the church body, and then they're out there.
So, I'm guessing that most of us go to the shops on a regular basis, don't we? Unless you're one of those clever people, of which I am certainly not one, who does all your shopping online. But how often do we think about or really focus on the folk that work in the shops that we visit? We might exchange a few pleasantries as we're trying to grapple with the incessant flow of goods off the conveyor belt at Tesco. We might comment on the weather as we wait for our credit card to connect. We might have a moan at them about how long we've been waiting or about a faulty product. But how often do we stop and think about what it's like to work in a retail environment? What stresses and pressures and uncertainties go along with those jobs? How often do we see the folk that work in our shops as people rather than service providers? My name is Sarah Leeson, and I work as a full-time church and community lay pastor at Emmanuel United Reformed Methodist Church, which is situated right in the heart of Redditch town centre. And as part of my community pastor role, sharing in the church's offering of care to the wider town centre community, I am a chaplain with the Redditch Town Centre Retail Chaplaincy Team, which operates under the umbrella of and with the valuable support of Faith at Work in Worcestershire. In a nutshell, we are an ecumenical team of currently 6 chaplains, both lay and ordained, who regularly visit those working in shops in the indoor Kingfisher shopping centre and also in the outside areas of the town, including the outdoor market. For some of us, like myself, this chaplaincy forms part of our paid ministry. For others, this is a voluntary role. And in more recent years, the chaplaincy has also extended to outlying parts of the town. As chaplains, we are not there to impose our beliefs on anyone, although we are happy to discuss matters of faith if the opportunity presents itself. We are available for people of all faiths and none, to provide a listening ear, to offer support in times of crisis, whether personal or at work, to develop an understanding of what it's like to work in the retail sector, and to show that the church cares and values what goes on outside its walls. We care about the people who spend a large part of their lives working there. This is workplace chaplaincy. It's exciting, challenging, and stretching to be part of the church that leaves the building. And if you want to hear more about what that involves, then come to my workshop later.
It feels a bit unfair that Faith at Work in Worcestershire is going to get 3 bites of this particular cherry because we are involved with workplace chaplaincy. I must correct David. David, we're Faith at Work in Worcestershire. That's our title. And it's just think about that for a moment in terms of what it means. And my colleague Philip will say a bit more about that. As David said, I'm here to talk about fire service chaplaincy. We approach it as a workplace chaplaincy, similarly to the retail chaplaincy that Sarah's just spoken about. And we do it under the umbrella of Faith at Work in Worcestershire. And specifically, we have a signed memorandum of agreement between Faith at Work in Worcestershire and the Fire Authority here in Hereford and Worcestershire. The Fire Rescue Service is a public authority with a service authority made up of county councillors from both counties that oversee it, and there are currently about 820 staff working across the 2 counties. That's been drastically reduced over recent years by about 25%, something like that, because of cuts in the budget. 80% of those staff are operational. They're firefighters of one form or another. 400 of them being retained firefighters, which means part-time effectively. They have another job that they do, but they are paid firefighters. Our chaplaincy is carried out site by site. There are 27 fire stations across the whole area, 19 of which are retained fire stations. And there are 3 other locations: the headquarters in Worcester, the logistics department where they have the workshops, and the training centre. And I act as the coordinating chaplain as part of my role as industrial missioner with Faith at Work in Worcestershire, just one of the things that I do. And we deliver chaplaincy with a network of what we call associate chaplains, similar to the chaplains that Sarah's spoken of. And we would like to have a chaplain in all of those stations across the 2 counties. We don't have that many at the moment. Perhaps after today we can recruit a few more. That would be lovely. Another particular thing that I do is to coordinate the critical incident support work of the fire service, post-traumatic stress, when firefighters find themselves in positions where they are exposed to traumatic events. And we have a team of 13 people from within the fire service that I help to coordinate. The associate chaplains that we work with, though, are not directly involved with that, because their role is to support, in the way that's already been mentioned by many people this morning, those at work in their fire service. So it is about getting alongside people. It's a pastoral ministry of listening. It's about being a critical friend to those that we meet. And it's about helping people discover God at work, in the work that they do and in their workplace. And again, if you'd like to know a bit more about fire service chaplaincy, come to my workshop.
But I'm the team leader of Faith at Work in Worcestershire, and so I work with Sarah and with Dick and with a whole lot of other people in a variety of places across Worcestershire. We have retail chaplains in, as well as Redditch, in Kidderminster, Stourport, Worcester City, and we also have people doing chaplaincy in factories and offices in other parts of the county, both in the public and the private sector. Rural ministry covers a whole gamut of things which it would be possible to talk about, what it's like to live in a rural area. The cost of housing, transport, access to broadband. You may, if you live in a rural area, be very familiar with that. If you're not, you may take it for granted you can get high-speed broadband, whereas if you live in a village, you may find that the rate is pretty rubbish, actually. And if you're a business, that's a real problem. And despite all the stuff that's being said about it being rolled out, it's taking some time for that to happen. But chaplaincy in that context is largely with farmers, but also with some of the rural businesses that are not agricultural. And in fact, there's a substantial amount of business in rural areas that isn't about farming. Farming forms the backdrop and is very significant for the landscape. But in economic terms, farming actually is quite small, even in rural areas. And so my colleague Tim, who's here, does quite a lot of visiting with people in some of the small trading estates there are in rural areas, and indeed some of the diversifications, as they're often known, on farms, which are quite often where farmers either let out premises or have another business of their own in order to supplement the agricultural income. Farming is a lonely business. It's often a family business, although some of the bigger estates employ farm managers. There's usually only 2 or 3 employees. It's not a big enterprise in terms of the number of people. And so often you will find somebody who's working alone on a tractor or in the fields or a barn with the sheep or cattle. One person, one business, at the mercy of economic forces that you have little control over. Think about the milk price. I could explain at some length about how that's connected to world production, to sanctions in Russia, to exchange rates, all those kinds of things. There can be a lot of anxiety and stress, and it's not just your income, but your house that is at stake. We need more people to be at the market, so if you can spare an hour or 2 on a Wednesday morning, once a month perhaps, or on a Saturday, that would be great. But also, we just need, I think, people to understand, those of us who live in towns in particular, that our food doesn't magically arrive on the supermarket shelf. It needs people, and we need to understand what they're doing in order to make that possible, and some of the pressures that they live under.
Hello, my name's David. I'm one of the chaplains at Worcestershire Acute Trust. Chaplains blog, stardate 16/5/13. I've encouraged staff, and successfully in most cases, to share their stories of what they do and why they do it. And I thought you might be interested in mine. I arrived in work at 8 a.m. and had a bleep from Avon 1. A patient was poorly, his relatives were anxious, he was in a side room and had requested communion. I spent 30 minutes or so with this lovely man, and I agreed to take him communion in the afternoon. Just as I was leaving, the bleep went for another ward. A staff member's mother had deteriorated. I'd met them the day before. She was a wonderful lady of 95. She made me laugh as she told me what's what. I shared some support with her family and went on my way. A volunteer came in to see me to talk about whether she could give some time to the hospital, and while she was there, I met some people in the most tragic of circumstances. One by one, in fearful procession, family members came in to tell me of a child who was dying. Tears shed, grief palpable. None of us would want to swap places with them. And then, just as I was catching my breath, a bleep came again. The lady I'd seen earlier had passed away peacefully. I went to give some support and prayers as they had requested. Again, grief and tears. In between, I did some mundane stuff. Had some laughs and jokes with staff, teased some people, was teased by others, fired off some emails, published some good stuff on the blog about Avon 1, and went home knackered. It might not seem much. I didn't save anyone's life. I was just there in some extreme times in people's lives. Why do I do it? Well, it's what I do. And I hope it brings some humanity and comfort to those I meet. Is it important? I don't know. But it can be to those individuals. Is it easy? Not really. It's hard to be in the presence of such raw human emotion and for it not to stick to you. It was a busy day, but not unusual. And now you know.
Hi, I'm Pete Wood and I'm a street pastor. I volunteered to become a street pastor in 2012, and the training process which happened after that was quite in depth actually. Some really good sessions before we were let out onto the streets, which began in April 2013. I'm sure all of you know what street pastors do. You probably heard the popular stories of those people taking flip-flops out with them, as are pink, and handing them out to the ladies on the streets who are walking around with no shoes on. So our idea of giving flip-flops is to literally help them walk safely from one area to another without getting glass in their feet. We hand out bottles of water to people that are thirsty, people who've had too much to drink, might be experiencing some kind of drug overdose. A street pastor is someone from the Christian community who is willing to care, listen and help. And it's particularly amongst young people who have found themselves disenfranchised and marginalised from society. Street pastors are willing to engage people wherever they are in terms of their perspective on life and the location where they hang out on the streets, in the pubs, in the clubs and the parties that they go to. Street pastor is there to get to know people in the community and to build relationships in order to find out their needs and what can be done to help. As street pastors, we aim to gain the credibility of the community so that the community knows that the church has come to them. So a street pastor's main role is to make themselves available to care, listen, help and support vulnerable people. Ideally, they should be able to commit to working one Saturday at night a month between 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. The ways in which we regularly offer practical help is calming aggressive situations. As I've said, giving out flip-flops to young women, giving out thermal blankets to people at risk of exposure and hypothermia, clearing up hundreds of broken or discarded bottles, which can be potential weapons or sources of injury. And we attend numbers of antisocial incidents. I think street pastors is a great ministry. I didn't see it fitting the remit of chaplaincy, and I struggled with that initially. So I hope maybe I can go into a little bit more detail in my workshop if you want to come along to that. Thank you.
Prison is like a town in miniature. We have doctors, dentists, work, education, an association which is the nearest prisoners in closed conditions get to a night out. As chaplains, we loiter with intent, trying to be intricately weaved into the prison's fabric and indispensable to staff and prisoners. Our work is enriched by being a multi-faith team. We respect the integrity of each tradition and celebrate the differences. No one faith has a monopoly on holiness. Whilst many claim to have no religious faith, many enjoy a deep spirituality. The remand setting is busy with people coming and going to court. We hear about the dog locked up at home or how the 2-minute phone call didn't happen, so the family don't know where they are. As they walk to work, they hand in applications to record a story for their child or to tell us they can't get a prayer mat from the canteen. Or they may ask about a phone call a colleague made the previous day. Others simply appreciate how different the chaplaincy area feels and want to have some quiet. We get applications for reading glasses, incense sticks and rosemary beads, as they tend to call them. The phones will be ringing and there are legal duties to be done. No day is the same. And without a strong band of volunteers, we'd not be able to keep up with everything. It can be frenetic. We see raw and deep-felt emotions, have profound conversations, as well as enjoy great humour with staff and prisoners alike. It's not uncommon for one of us to be told, "No one's ever listened to my story before." And yes, there are those who try to pull the wool over our eyes. As well as seeing everyone within 24 hours of their arrival and all those in the hospital and punishment block every day, we run faith groups and services, as well as attend a variety of multidisciplinary meetings. Having confirmed bad news, we will tell prisoners and try to support them as they feel such helplessness and isolation in their grief. We will informally mediate between individuals and speak out for that which is right. We facilitate special family visits, music and creative workshops. Restorative justice and wellbeing courses look at the effects of crime and bereavement respectively. We see dramatic changes as emotions are expressed, often for the first time. To conclude, the police seek in every human being a murderer. The wise man and philosopher seek in every murderer a human being. We Christians seek God in every person, even in murderers. And each of us will find what he seeks. The police will find their murderer. The philosophers will find their human beings. And we shall find God in every prison.
Yes, good morning folks, I'm Richard Alford, I'm a waterways chaplain. It's said in the UK that people live within 50 miles of a piece of water, whether that be a river, a canal or even the sea. And here in Worcestershire you have the Rivers Avon, the River Severn and others. And also on the canals, you have the Worcester-Birmingham Canal, you have the Droitwich Canal, and the Stratford Canal and the Stafford-Worcester Canal as well. And on those canals, on those waterways, people live on their boats. It is now said that more people live on boats than at the height of the Industrial Revolution, or when the canals were carrying trade, that more people now live on those boats full-time, permanently, as well as those who hire boats or who just use them for leisure cruising. And as a result of the survey done by the Salvation Army in the Watford, Kings Langley areas, they found a degree of hidden poverty. They were looking at poverty issues, and they found this hidden poverty on people who lived on their boats in that area. And so just over 7 years ago, the Waterways Chaplaincy started, but we follow in a long tradition of Christians serving people who live or work on the waterways. Our work is different from other chaplains in one or two areas. One reason is that we serve people who are on the move. In the canals, if you have what's called a continuous cruising licence, you have to move every 14 days. And sometimes even less than that. And of course, moving means moving not just a couple of miles, but moving a good number of miles. But the main part of our work is with the boater, and that work is as varied as the day is long. So it might be helping them to access benefits, to pay for their licence. You have to have a licence if you want to be on a boat. It may be helping them through locks, or even crewing for them if necessary. It may be just someone who they can talk to. When the survey took place with the Salvation Army, there was a good number of suicides on the canal because it is very lonely. It can be the joyous things like taking a wedding blessing on a boat, or it can be the saddest thing like taking a funeral. One thing it isn't, it's not boring. But always, like other chaplains, we do it because we hear God's call on our lives, and we have responded. Do you have to have a boat to be a waterways chaplain? No. Do you have to have an experience to be a waterways chaplain? No, we will train you. But you do need to have a love of canals and that sort of thing. Will you enjoy it? Yes. And one thing I can promise you, because we do ask people to walk a towpath, is you will become fit. So, ladies and gentlemen, forget the diet, become a waterways chaplain, and you will become fit and you will lose weight. I can guarantee this. And of course, you do get to wear the wonderful uniform, of course. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Fiona Howarth. I'm the chaplain at the University of Worcester. I have to say that there is no one model of chaplaincy in universities. Much will depend on how chaplains are employed. Some are employed by churches, housed by churches, and work in universities by invitation. I am employed by the University of Worcester, but around half of my funding does come from the Methodist Church, the URC, and the Diocese of Worcester, which brings about some interesting dynamics. Universities are in a situation of change at the moment. The changes to the way in which universities are funded is having a significant impact. Universities are now competing for students, and that brings with it increasing amounts of pressure on staff, particularly. My role as chaplain is to offer pastoral support to staff and students of all faiths and none. I am the only full-time chaplain at the University of Worcester. The pressures on staff are growing. Staff are increasingly finding themselves under stress, and the relationship with students is also changing. There is now, because students are paying such high sums of money to do degrees, a sense that they are in a client relationship and are now looking for value for money from their education. Universities also work within the equalities framework, in which religion is a protected characteristic. It's very interesting in my work to come across people who are very concerned about equality and diversity, but there are significant numbers of students and also some staff members for whom faith, the church, is an instrument of condemnation and judgment. And it is very hard often to try and counter that impression that the church is a place of exclusion. We are also required to work within the prevent agenda of the government, which means preventing violent extremism. And chaplains within government legislation have a role to play monitoring the use of prayer rooms and also monitoring speakers invited to universities. So it is a very complex environment from that point of view. It is a positive environment. I encounter lots of young people, many of whom have never had any meaningful encounter with faith in their lives at all. And it's interesting to begin to try and have those conversations with young people about faith and spirituality. If you'd like to know more, please do ask me later on. Thank you.
Hospice has an inpatient unit, a daily routine of clinics, day hospice and living well courses, and patients being cared for in the community. We have paid and volunteer chaplains working in all areas. Chaplains usually belong to a faith community, and we maintain an extensive list of ministers of all faiths who can be contacted if required. We are also there for everyone, even if they do not subscribe to any belief system. We work with patients and families when they are managing illness, at the end of life and in bereavement, including offering funeral planning and celebrancy. We also work with staff and volunteers for whom day-to-day pressures can cause tremendous stress. According to the Oxford textbook of palliative medicine, spirituality describes the depth of human life, with individuals seeking significance in their experiences and in the relationships they share with family and friends, with others who experience illness, and with those engaged in their treatment and support. To talk of the spiritual is to provide the widest possible framework for an individual's experience of illness. For some, this will involve an intense sense of the reality of a personal God, and for some others, the most general search for significance and meaning. For many, questions of ultimacy become acute. As the definition explains, spiritual care is not just religious care. In a palliative care setting, it can be thought of as helping a person to be at peace with the life which is past, and at peace with the death which is ahead. This happens by talking and building relationships, by using music, activities and prayers, and other words where required and where appropriate, by sharing stories and building up a profile of a life, not a person who is sick, but a whole person with a past, a present and a future, even if it is going to be one of short days or weeks. St Richard's Hospice is always in need of people, though not necessarily in chaplaincy or inpatient contact roles. Please also be open to other volunteering opportunities which can equally be a response to God's calling on our lives. I want to finish by quoting the SPCK's book, Being a Chaplain. Much chaplaincy occurs in marginal places. May God bless and guide you as you consider which margins he wants you to go to in order to take his love and hope to the people who need it the most.
It's also important that congregations recognise that chaplains are not people who've deserted the church. Chaplaincy is owned by the whole church, and it's important that we become holistic in our approach. But I also think I have a concern, and I hope that's something by doing this today on behalf of Church Together in Worcestershire, that chaplaincy isn't seen as something out there by the rest of the church. It is an integral part of the mission of the whole church. I'm encouraging, certainly in our Methodist ways of feedback from chaplains into the life of local churches, of their experience. So we learn from each other. The energy that the chaplains have out in the world feeds into the life of local churches.